Good morning. I'm Peter Gettler. It's my honor and privilege to be president of the Cato Institute. I'm going to deliver some introductory remarks that will be very brief because I know the number of people who have shown up here at Cato this morning or joining us online who are here to hear me speak is exactly 0, unless my mother happened to log in which case that number is 1, and I have to acknowledge her by saying, "Hi, Mom." But I'll be especially brief since we're joined this morning by 2 former commissioners of labor statistics and heads of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Dr. Erica Groshen and Dr. William Beach, and we want to hear from them. Of course, no head of the Cato Institute would ever concede that the production of economic statistics is a function that can only be accomplished by government. But so long as citizens and economic and market practitioners have ceded that role to the government, it's important that we do the best job possible in computing and compiling these numbers. I think it's always important to remember that economic statistics are not infallible. Most of us, since our days as students, fall into the trap, perhaps more often than not, of believing that our economic statistics reveal the absolute truth. But we should always keep in mind the challenges related to producing such figures for an economy as large and as complicated as ours, and keep in mind the factors at play that may prevent such numbers from truly representing economic gospel. But a strong consensus exists that this is something at which we do a pretty good job. And it's important that this be the case, because in the contest of ideas in which we are all engaged, We tend to argue on the basis of outcomes that are revealed, at least in the case of economic policy, in our economic statistics. Of course, another thing that no president of Cato would ever concede is that these outcomes alone are the basis upon which we should be making decisions about policy. Yes, we firmly believe that liberty and free markets produce the best outcomes, but it's as important as these outcomes is the moral case for individual liberty that we outline very clearly in Cato's statement of principles. We live, of course, in an age of polarization where nearly everything in America is being politicized. Even, we are told, the Thanksgiving holiday that we'll celebrate next month, where we are often hear stories of families being divided at the dinner table. One of the things for which I'm truly thankful is that this is not yet the case in my own home. We will all pay a price of this politicization of everything finds its way into the production and reporting of our economic statistics in any meaningful way. For many reasons, but most importantly, because it will contribute to a blindness in understanding the consequences of the policy decisions we choose to make. It's important that we remain on guard with respect to the risk of politics impacting the quality of our economic data, but equally important that we don't jump to conclusions when events such as those of earlier this year raise concerns that this is happening. Which is why I'm delighted that we're joined today by Erica Groshen and William Beach, two former commissioners of labor statistics, who I think I can say each represent a different economic tradition, and were each appointed by presidents of different parties. We want to hear from Commissioner Groshen and Commissioner Beach their insight on the quality of our economic statistics and the risks, including political risks, that could impact the quality of these numbers. Dr. Groshen is senior economics advisor at the Cornell University School of Industrial and Labor Relations and a research fellow at the Upjohn Institute for Employment Research. She served as the 14th Commissioner of Labor Statistics from 2013 to 2017, before which she was at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Dr. Groshen holds a bachelor's degree in mathematics and economics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a PhD in economics from Harvard University. Dr. Beach is a senior fellow in economics at the Economic Policy Innovation Center, or EPIC, and the Coffin Fellow at the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation. Prior to this, he was the 15th Commissioner of Labor Statistics, serving in that capacity from 2019 to 2023. Dr. Beach is a fellow think tanker, as in addition to his current role at EPIC. He was Vice President for Policy Research at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University prior to joining the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Dr. Beach graduated from Washburn University in Topeka and earned his master's degree in economics and history from the University of Missouri-Columbia. His PhD in economics was earned from the University of Buckingham in the United Kingdom. I welcome Dr. Groshen and Dr. Beach to Cato, and we're very appreciative that they've joined us today. Joining them on their panel will be my colleague Norbert Michel, and the panel will be moderated by my colleague Jay Kedia. Jay and Norbert are both part of our Center for Monetary and Financial Alternatives here at Cato. So without further delay, Dr. Groshen, Dr. Beach, Jay and Norbert.
Thank you, Peter, for introducing us and introducing everyone on the panel. I think we can just jump right in. I'm going to start with you, Erica, if that's okay. There's been a lot of criticism recently directed at the BLS leadership over the employment data revisions. I think it might be helpful to have you explain what role the commissioner actually plays in that process.
Sure. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to you and all of the Cato Institute for inviting us to talk about this today. So Let me tell you the role of the BLS commissioner in the monthly employment situation. Much less than you might think. In some ways, more than you might think, in other ways, less. So what do I mean by less? On a day-to-day basis, every month, when the data comes out, what does the commissioner do? The commissioner waits until all of the numbers are final and has no access to any preliminary estimates or anything, just sees the final tables and sees a draft of the narrative that accompanies the numbers. So remember, there are two different surveys, the household survey, the CPS, the payroll survey, the CES. Those are processed completely separately by two different groups. And mostly, this is a really tightly coordinated process. It takes place over, the actual production of the tables takes place over just a few days after it's collected by programs that are set up way in advance that are used every month to produce the data. The commissioner gets the final tables, reviews the narrative, is briefed on what this means, and that's the role. The commissioner has no access to the input data, to the programs themselves, sees nothing before it is final.
Bill, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'll tell you a story. Everything Erica said was right, and that's where I usually start, by saying everything Erica says is right. When I first joined BLS, I was appointed by President Trump 2 years under President Biden, so I'm kind of a fence straddler here. I'm there first week, and I decide I need to change a word in the employment situation text. That's the text of the jobs report. So I call them the associate commissioner in, and she comes with 5 or 6 other very worried-looking people that I was going to change a word. And I did succeed in getting my viewpoint across, and I changed that word. I tell that story because the staff at BLS is so professional. Bill Wojtrowski, who's currently the acting commissioner, told me the day before I started, if you do anything, understand this, if I'm cut, I bleed BLS blue. It is a culture there which preserves the integrity of the data, protects the integrity of the data. Understand, BLS is not an independent organization. It's part of the Department of Labor, which is part of the government of the United States, which is an elected government through the President of the United States. So all of that power flows in the direction of BLS, but BLS has to have an arm's length relationship with the administration. And much of that arm's length relationship, which we might use the term autonomy, maybe, not a bad term, comes from this culture. Now, the commissioner is the person who is appointed by the president, nominated by the president, confirmed by the Senate, so it's a Senate-confirmed position. The commissioner really needs to be the link between the Bureau and the politics. Needs to know what the agenda is, right? Mm-hmm. But doesn't bring that agenda and say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have, these are our numbers. So it is really it's not a unique position in the government. There are many other statistical heads that serve in this same role, but it is a vital and absolutely important part. If you're building a bridge, you're the architect for the bridge. You don't want to listen to the politician that says, we only need 1 lane and maybe not so much concrete, and we can reuse the steel from another bridge. You don't want to have that. You want to have professionalism in the whole process. And I think that's where I'd like to echo what Erica has said. It's a very professional society over there.
Yeah, and I would push it, one step further. As Bill knows, and he very much played this role at BLS, and I felt that this was a key component of my responsibility, is looking over the horizon. Statistical agencies need to be continually improving. If they don't, they lose relevance, they become relatively inefficient because they're not taking advantage of technological changes. So statistical agencies are never, and no program is never one and done. It's always in the process of getting better and getting better. And that's where the the commissioner makes the most difference, making sure you've got the right people in place to lead that change, helping to direct what kind of changes you should go towards. That is the most important role, that and the communication that Bill was talking about.
Yeah, Jay, I'll let you get something in here
No,
in just
please.
a second. He's the moderator, but I do want to, I think that's a great point. And the only reason it comes up now, Erica, is that we had this event on August the 1st where the president fired the current commissioner. And you can use that word current because the commissioner is kind of in that spot. She's no longer there, but until there's another commissioner. What is the role of the commissioner? The role is a leadership role. It's not a management role. You lead the agency. You say, well, this is where we have to go. Response rates are cratering for the current population survey, the household survey. What do we do to fix that? Here's where we go with that. You get the consensus. Here's the direction we want to go. And you build resources. You build collegiality. You build goal setting. It's a great position, but it's a leadership position. I don't think it's a management position. No.
Absolutely. Although we do choose people. I mean, I chose Bill to be the deputy commissioner, and you kept him as such.
Great choice. And like I say, I try to do everything that Erica says is right, so I just kept Bill Wojtrowski on staff.
Norbert, just so that people are clear about who uses this data and actually how important it is. You and I aren't BLS commissioners, but we use the data a whole bunch of times.
Sure.
So can you explain kind of how important the BLS data is and who exactly uses it?
Sure. I could also attest to what Bill said, though. I mean, I obviously I wasn't a commissioner, but after Bill was confirmed, we were talking, and he was talking about how professional the staff was and everything. And so let's grab lunch. And he said, yeah, sure, anytime. I don't really do anything. I remember that.
Which is not true.
No, I might have made that up.
Just discount that.
No, to answer Jay's question, though, many people in academia and think tanks and policy all over the country really use BLS data and census data and a lot of these surveys. Even private companies that put their own data sets together, they still interact with some of this stuff. I actually used consumer expenditure survey data on my dissertation. One of the better publications in my track record, BLS, consumer expenditure survey data. And it is always, as far as I can remember anyways, they've always had a reputation of the data being solid and trustworthy. And my recollection as well is that when people criticized the data for being off in a certain way, they were receptive to those changes. And they've adjusted their methods, their methodologies and procedures. And I think it would be hard pressed to find very many people who would say that the BLS has done a poor job of trying to have an objective set of statistics for people.
Well, now that we're in this conversation already, let's address what the actual problems are, if there are any. Bill, maybe you can answer this. What are the structural problems with the methodology the BLS uses for the employment data, maybe specifically, and if you have broader thoughts in general?
Sure. Well, I'd rather start with the price data, because I think that's a good example of how we can change things, and then we'll go into problems and how we can change. So Erica and I were faced with the Consumer Price Index having to be updated. She began this process. I completed the process. Why updated? Well, because the world's changing all the time, constantly changing. I mean, all the Hayekians in here totally understand that. There's no such thing as a static universe. And price indexing requires that there be updating to what you look at, what you measure, how you measure it, and then the methodology of weighting the index so it's accurate. And one of the first things that I did was kind of complete a project started by Erica to do a massive updating of the CPI. We formed a panel through the Committee on National Statistics. The expert panel brought a lot of good information to the panel, and they came up with 37 recommendations, and we implemented 31 of those right away, including moving the weighting from an every other year process weighting is every other year. That is, we would say, well, groceries are worth this much, or gasoline is worth this much. This is the weight to an every year system. And that made the index better. So the problems now on the labor force side, on the employment side, there's so many. Let's just take the first and most obvious one, the one that Erica and I have been on Capitol Hill working on a lot. And that is that the cost of collecting the household survey, from which the unemployment rate comes, and the labor force data, the demographic data, and the response rate are moving in the opposite directions. Higher costs, lower response rates. We're getting to the point, I think, where certain details cannot be published in the labor force data, in the household survey. It is a matter of not just putting more money there, you have to in the short run, but to modernize that survey. Blend it with private sector data, blend it with internet data, create a much larger pool, have a survey and blended data, boom. The establishment survey from which we get the jobs numbers on First Friday, this is a survey of business establishments. I think Eric and I have a little disagreement here, but I think there are three things you really need to do there. You need to look at the seasonal adjustment factors. You need to look at a model called the death-birth model. We can get into that. And most importantly, in my mind, you need to have a different sampling frame for that survey. Now, these are really technical things, right? I went to the White House just recently, and I sat down and talked to the chief statistician. I said, there are three things you need to do and he was hoping I was going to talk about firing people. There was all these kinds of terrible things was going on. And I said, birth, death model, seasonal factors, and sampling frame. And he's just like, oh my God, I can't stand this. So, yeah, there's some really important things to be done on both fronts.
So maybe, Erica, you can talk about specifically, let's start with the birth-death model. Mm-hmm. Maybe it would be helpful for people, a quick overview of what that is and kind of what the problems are, and if we can solve the problem right here, that would be great, but whatever you think the best solution to these things might be.
Okay, so now every program at BLS is actually designed differently from every other because each one is designed for particular measurement objectives, right? So the whole idea of the establishment survey is that on a quarterly basis with a fairly long lag, BLS gets a really good count of the number of jobs in the economy. And this comes from administrative data. The BLS funds the states to curate their unemployment insurance records that they receive from the states for the employers. And these are used, the reason that the states do that is for what's called experience rating in the unemployment insurance system. But the states had to do that anyway. The BLS says, okay, we're going to fund you to curate that data to make it into a business register for the BLS to use to track employment in the country. So that has its name, QCEW, the Quarterly Census of Employment and Wages. Hugely useful information, but it takes a long time. First, the companies have 3 months before they even have to report it, and then the states have to process it, get it to the BLS. That's the most accurate data. That's available on BLS over the years, has really speeded up that process, so now the delays are only 6 to 9 months, but that's still too long for monetary policy and a lot of other reasons. So, to get the information out faster, BLS chooses a random sample of employers within the QCEW. It asks them to report on the monthly basis how many people they had on the payrolls during the pay period that contains the 12th of the month. So that's the sample, that's the question. It goes out to 160,000 employers every month. That covers over 600,000 work sites, about a third of jobs in the country, and that's happening every month, right? It comes back in, and the BLS tallies that up, and from that, it estimates how much job creation there was in the past month. Now, there are a couple of challenges with this, and let me mention the two most important ones. One is that when BLS asks the employers at the end of the month, how many people did you have on your payrolls during the pay period that contains the 12th of the month? Some of them can't answer in time. Their pay period may not be over yet. Or someone's sick, or it's low priority, or whatever. And so only about 2/3 of them answer on time. But that's still good enough to provide useful information, and BLS does not want to sit on that, so it shares it as the preliminary estimate of what's happened to job growth. The next month, by then, the companies get another chance to answer. Most of them respond by the second month, and then they get a third chance to really just sweep it all up. And that's when, so that's 3 reads on that month. But, so that's one problem. That's not a problem, that's a feature, I should say. A feature of this is the BLS wants to meet both requirements, really timely and really accurate. Yeah. And so it issues the most timely estimate with the lower accuracy, and then works up the next month to much higher accuracy, and the month after that even higher. Okay, a feature. Then, once a year, BLS says, well, we've been estimating all of this growth for the entire year. Let's check back in with the QCEW for that exact time period and see if we nailed it. And they know that one important reason that this survey is not going to match up entirely is because a survey of ongoing employers misses establishment births and establishment deaths. Because in real time, you can't actually detect either births or deaths. And so they have the birth-death estimate each month, and you can read the exact equation on the BLS website that estimates births and deaths in that month. Once a year, it trues up and it says, okay, did we nail it or were we off? And let me start off by saying, in the midst of the worst parts of the pandemic recession, Bill Beach's BLS nailed the job change. When that turmoil was driving everyone crazy, 2020 nailed it, right? This year, it was off. Right? Off a little bit more than normal, but not way out of bounds for what's been seen before. And that every year this happens.
Well, and just so that we provide some scale here, even with the following response rate, it's only in that first month you see that at about 65% of firms respond. But by the second month, you see that go up beyond 85%. Is that correct?
That's right. And by the third month, it's 95%. But that's 95% of the establishments who have agreed to participate. Mm-hmm. We're down to 43% in of the employers who asked to participate even agree to participate in it. So this is a failure of the private sector to do some civic duty that in past years, past generations, the private sector saw this as an important civic responsibility, and now they don't.
Yeah. Well, Norbert, that's a great point for you to jump in here. What do you think some of the reasons might be for the private sector to be hesitant about this? We're libertarians. We shared some privacy concerns when the government comes to collect our data. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's a problem? And maybe you can talk about what you think the reasons might be for the private sector's hesitancy here.
Sure. I think, on the response rate, particularly, I'm not so sure. Maybe people are over-surveyed now. That could be an issue, I think. Mm-hmm. But I think that I'd like to point out that, and I'm probably the outlier on the panel for this one, but I do think that some of this is probably a crowd-out factor, in the sense that private firms do handle a lot of data in other areas, and maybe they would in these areas that we're talking about as well if the government didn't have as much of a sort of monopoly on some of these statistics. So I do think, and I'm the first to admit, and we've heard already, the BLS does work with private sector firms already. So, people like ADP, I think that there could be other ways to improve the incentives on the private sector side. The Federal Reserve does a survey of consumer finances and has an excellent response rate historically, but they pay a lot for that. and maybe that is the incentive.
Well, exactly. I mean, I feel, yes, there's some civics lesson here about following response rates to surveys across the board, but do you think that that's really where the problem is that there's no monetary incentive for the firms to fulfill their surveys?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
I think that's probably part of it, yeah. I mean, most people probably can identify with a monetary incentive to do something or not to do something. So, and I'm not saying that means that we should fund the BLS more or we shouldn't fund the BLS more. I'm not saying that. I'm just pointing out that is a natural incentive. If Bill paid me twice as much money as I was making now, when we worked at Heritage, I might have stayed there.
I should have done that. Let me just raise another point that I think is relevant. Robert Gordon at Northwestern University alerted me to this with respect to the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index. He believed that the compliance that firms face, the rising regulatory compliance, was so great, and firms had to allocate so much money to their staff to just fill out the compliance forms, that it was lowering participation rates in surveys.
I see.
Kind of an unexpected area, probably an area where Cato might be more sympathetic, but I think it's real. So if you have a firm, a small firm, that is required now by state, local, and federal government to comply with more regulations, fill out more forms, or do more paperwork, it could very well be that they've agreed to fill out our establishment survey form, but that they can't get to it. Or maybe it's something that's lower price, or because we don't compel it, it's not required, whereas these other forms are required by law. They just say, well, we're just going to skip this month. I must say the response rate for the first month is falling pretty rapidly. Sometimes it hits into the low 50s. And I think that's a real concern if you're using your first month to predict your third month results, and you've only got 50% of your returns. So maybe that's one of the causes for the large revisions. But we should look more comprehensively at the business community and say, well, it's just not that they don't want to participate. That's not been our history. Our history has been patriotic participation in the surveys, very strong participation. It's that maybe they just are so burdened with the cost of government in their business that they can't participate in some areas.
I think we certainly would agree with that as well.
Well, I think it's an empirical matter. I don't think we have to approach it as from a theoretical standpoint. I think we should be surveying.
See, that's the problem.
We should be looking at our firms and saying, what is your regulatory compliance, and begin to then connect that to other things. Regulation, I won't get into it, but I suspect in the middle of the political spectrum, there's a consensus that we should have some regulations on health and safety and all these sort of things. If it's now affecting our statistical infrastructure, which is how we run the economy, then we need to right-size some things.
Yeah. And I mean, there are a number of really important tools available for doing this. So one of the projects that I've gotten involved in since I left the BLS, that actually has engaged the BLS along the way, is being run by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation to create data and technology standards for employer data so that they become much more interoperable, right? And what that does is lower the burden on companies of doing all sorts of reporting to the government, but also on doing benchmarking for themselves and allowing them to do due diligence, things like that. So this is an effort to create a public-private partnership environment where employers and others who need to get data from employers can sit down at the table and decide what should these records look like so that it's very easy for the employers to respond and to set up systems to enable it. And that is the statistical system of the future in my eyes.
Norbert, would you want to jump in here?
Yeah, and those things, these make sense. They do. Not surveying people to find out if they've over-surveyed.
Yeah.
We
That
can't
would
do
not work.
We can't do that, Bill.
Yeah.
But otherwise, though, these things do make sense. But I just wanted to point out, just to kind of make a finer point on what I was saying about crowding out. Many companies, payroll companies, hedge fund companies, large publicly traded corporations have an enormous amount of data, and they could profit off of that. There would be a profit motive there. But as long as we have the government providing the data, there's much less of an incentive for people to buy it. And if there's less of an incentive for people to buy it, then there's going to be less of an incentive to produce it. So that is what I mean by the crowding out piece.
So I'm going to disagree.
I knew it.
I don't actually agree with you. So what is the role of government data and private data? I actually think it's a complementary role and not one of substitutions. So here's a story. I was at a conference. At the conference were some folks who scrape the web every day for prices. And they were complaining about how low frequency and how poor BLS's price work was. And they could do it every day. They were much better. Super beings. So at the break, I asked them, well, how do you know you're right? And they said, well, it's easy. We calibrate to the CPI. So what I think I hear from private individuals is that we can collect our company data for our own ROI purposes, our own HR purposes, whatever it is, market penetration rates, and we can then compare the relevant portions of our own data to the systemically comprehensive data that BLS points out. And then when we talk to, say, the big box companies or the big transportation companies, we say, can we use your data? They're very eager for us to use their data because it increases the complementarity. So I think the statistical system of the future is not private or public. I think both are not going to work. I'm very pessimistic about the public system. I think it's failing. I think it's got limited life expectancy because neither party is interested in really sustaining it over the long run, really getting behind it. But I think that a robust semi-private system, which is built around a spine of strong public data and eager participation by the private sector, is going to work. And why do I think we'll get that? Because the private sector cannot function without national data. These national companies need it. Even the small companies that operate at a local level need to know what the prevailing wages are and what kind of conditions here and there and so forth and so on, or prices in the CPI. So it's infrastructure. I think that the future is one of great promise if we can get past some of the political hurdles right now. But it's going to be this kind of, it's not a public-private partnership. It's more like co-production of our national statistics. It's really what I think I'm seeing.
Yeah, and I would push this further and say, look, freedom is the opportunity to make your own choices, right? And that will give us the best outcome for the country as a whole and us individually, as long as we make good choices. And what do we need to make good choices? We need evidence. Otherwise, we make what's technically known as lousy choices, right? And that doesn't get us where we need to go. Right. And if we want to have even the poorest people in the country making good choices, then we need to provide them with the information. The smallest companies, they need to have access to the same information about economic conditions and local conditions and where the likely employees are and what their characteristics are as the big companies.
Well, I mean, let's just get into the whole private sector debate now then. Norbert, we hear this argument a lot. It's funny, we're discussing this about the BLS, but this is usually an argument in healthcare or something like that, where it's like, okay, can we have a government-private sector compromise where you have both options? Mm-hmm. Let's put on our econ hats now and kind of discuss, can you have a free market alternative for this data if there is a zero cost public option?
That's a great question. I mean, I think on the surface, I think you typically would argue probably not, in the sense that, again, you're not going to have very many customers willing to pay top dollar for top quality information from a private source if it is provided for free,
Quote unquote.
quote unquote, by the government. So I don't see how you could get there. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that, in principle, especially with the system that we have, I have absolutely no problem with private and public sectors working together and trying to come up with the best sort of most objective data that we have, and I think that's what we've been doing. But to answer your question directly, I don't think that would work.
And just to use a kind of template for this,
Sorry, to be extra clear, like you would have a better outcome without the monopoly provider.
of course. Well, and so both of us work in macro finance research to some extent. The financial sector kind of gives us a template for this. We have
Yeah, absolutely.
massive platforms like CompuStat
Right.
that forget monthly. We have a debate about.
And more private data provision that's useful as infrastructure coming out of the private sector. I mean, there's no barrier or constraint on the provision of private data. It's just not very likely that it's going to be in the near term adequate. Let me give you an example. I doubt anybody in this room knows, and maybe I'm wrong about this, that what the most popular BLS product is. Erica knows. It's not the CPI, it's not the PPI, it's not the jobs report, it's the Occupational Outlook Handbook. And this is a handbook which is by far and by a full magnitude more popular than anything that BLS produces. And who uses the Occupational Handbook? It is people who are leaving school, leaving the military, leaving prisons, wondering, where should I go, what training should I have, and what is the expected salary that I'll get in over a 10-year period. Now, that is a huge public good collected through the National Compensation Survey and other surveys that BLS does. Very expensive survey. A lot of people go into it. A lot of people go into the publication of that book. And I doubt that anybody in the private sector would be producing that book as comprehensively as it is. It's an HR book, but it's for all parts of the universe of occupations. I'm as libertarian as anybody in this room, but I think there is a role here for this public good at the present and in the near term. In the future, it could very well be that private sector will find ways of producing infrastructure that is useful and that they get an adequate rate of return for, because that's another question. The public rate of return is not visible. So I think the evolution that we'll see is more and more cooperation between the two spheres and more co-production of this.
You mean that in the sort of short to medium run, but in the long run, you don't see the current system?
In the long run, we could have, through AI and other kinds of technologies which are coming to place, and I think the denationalization of economies, I don't think nationalization, we're in a bad spot right now, I think. We're getting a lot of nationalism going on throughout the world, but these are largely reactions to population movements and cultural change. I think as denationalization resumes, that you'll see more and more interest in cross-border statistics, which will have to be essentially produced by cooperative efforts of governments and private sector together.
Right. Yeah, and I would say hugely important. I mean, the private sector data that is coming out is hugely important to the public sector. It supplies some of the granularity and timeliness that it doesn't pay for the federal government to be producing, that people are willing to pay for individually with one of these providers. So the Commerce Bureau recently did a study of what has been the growth pattern of the companies that use federal data more than anyone else, and they are growing at 50% faster than any other part of the economy. They are just blossoming, and they are depending on this scaffolding of the federal data that is used most of our federal data has been created for public policy reasons, to inform policy. And then it turns out it's quite useful for many other purposes too, right? And so what we are, so the policymakers, and this is where the role of the parties comes into play, prioritizing at different times, the creation of different kinds of data that are necessary. It creates this, this spillover effect that it turns out is quite useful for the rest of the operations of businesses. And
Sort of like a
families and all
positive
of that.
externality.
Yep, it's a positive externality. And then the companies realize, oh, but there's even more demand for timeliness and granularity. And look, I happen to have some data that can address that. And they start putting that out, probably first as a form of advertising, but then they realize that there are marketable products for people who have very specific needs to know what's going on in their area.
In the CPI, we used to survey gasoline prices, and we would find filling stations in a statistically randomized way, and we go around the country asking these filling station owners how much they charge for gasoline, and that was really a bad system. So now what we do is we use a private sector aggregator of gasoline prices.
And for airline prices?
And airline prices, used in new cars, these are all sources that we take from the private sector. So it's an increasingly large role in the price index.
So we have maybe 5 minutes before I turn to the audience for questions. Maybe we can end on just addressing kind of the political climate. You know, several members of the current administration have accused the BLS of politicizing the employment data. I think I know both of your perspectives on this. I'm going to start with Norbert. Norbert, as a consumer of this data, we've been using it. Well, you've been using it for decades. Me for 1 decade. Have you ever considered that as when you're using it? Is that something you've ever worried about?
No, honestly.
Say that again.
No, I mean, it's never, I can't say that it's never occurred to me because I've heard people say that. But looking into it, it's very hard to support anything like that. Impossible, really, as far as I'm concerned. It just, no, it's as objective and apolitical, if you will, as possible, as far as I can tell.
Both of you get to answer that now.
Well, I'll take a stab at it. Do you want to answer first?
Oh, I've got my list of.
While Erica's
Yeah,
looking,
my-
could I just,
yeah.
and Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but the revisions, so Erica did a great job of discussing the revisions, right?
Right.
That's been one source of some of these charges, these political charges. But if you look over time, those revisions, the errors tend to balance out. It basically average to
And the
zero.
error is actually decreasing.
And it's gotten better over time.
Yeah.
So that's not just my opinion and what people say. That's empirical evidence against that proposition.
Right. Yeah, so remember I told you that this is a really finely tuned process that has to happen very fast. It's very highly choreographed. This person does this person does that, right? So imagine that you as a commissioner, and the commissioner is the only presidential appointee in BLS, right? Mm-hmm. So imagine you go in there and you want to fudge the data. Well, you had to throw a wrench into this process. So what would happen? First of all, there'd probably be a delay because you, on your own, would have to say, no, I want to, give me access to the programs, right? And then you'd have to be able to go in there and change the programs or tell people what to change in the program. So there'd probably be a delay. You'd probably get incomplete releases because they wouldn't all add up once you'd monkeyed around with it, especially over the course of 5 hours or whatever, right? You'd get unannounced changes in methodology, and BLS always announces its changes in methodology way in advance, so that would stand out. The staff who bleed BLS blue would resign. They would leak. That you'd get all of this resistance from the staff. The easiest thing to change would be the language that accompanies the release, where Bill wanted to change that word. Mm-hmm. I did the same thing when I first went in there. I said, let's liven this up. These releases are too boring. We can make them more interesting. And they told me, liveliness is not a goal, right? And so after that, I started showing a slide when I gave talks that showed the proverbial half-full glass and said, is this half full or half empty? What's the BLS answer? The BLS answer is, this is an 8-ounce vessel containing 4 ounces of water, right? And that's the way the releases are written and should be written. If you started to see that kind of spin, that would be an attempt to influence things. So there are these signs. There are none of those signs. I think to actually accomplish any of this, you'd have to have a new commissioner in with a posse.
Right.
And they would need to get up to speed to even be able to do
So
it.
that would be kind of the evidence for
For
this.
tampering, and there's none of that.
Bill, just before you go, so, and just to be clear, all those things that you listed, have you ever seen any evidence of any of those things?
None, not a one.
Okay.
I can affirm that too. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I served 2 years under President Trump and 2 years under President Biden. So let me tell you how politics does come in to the Bureau, because it would be foolish to say it never does. It comes in through the priorities of the incoming administration. So when President Trump came in, he was very interested in getting a handle on how people went in and out of unemployment, very interested in apprenticeships. He had a high priority on local estimation of wages because he was concerned about union activity around airports, okay, and many other things. So he would say to BLS, do you have anything on this? Can you work with Mike? Can you do this? And from existing data and existing effort, we would try to find ways of meeting the policy objectives or supporting the policy objectives of the White House. Why would we do otherwise? Well, if we were rebellious, if we were anti-democratic, there is an election. Elections matter. When President Biden came in, he had a very different set of priorities. So I was in the White House talking to his advisors really early about how to find information in our data about Native Americans, Native Alaskans, sexual orientation and gender identification, the DEI agenda. Well, that's just like a 180 from where President Trump was. But why would we have done otherwise? And we could only do a little bit. And I would never ask the Bureau to do more than they could do and to change any numbers that pre-existed. But there is a facing policy agenda for every administration that the statistical system has to be responsive to. And it may be that which gives the impression sometimes that statistics are politicized. But it's just the most thin connection to policy that you can imagine.
Yeah, I can give you another example. So I came in at the beginning of President Obama's second term, and what I heard was that the revisions were causing presidential heartburn. Yeah. To the payroll data. So the BLS had told me, the staff told me, so we are working on several ways to reduce the size of the revisions, and that's why they've been going down. Yeah. Right, and the way that they reduce, BLS has been able to reduce the revisions is by changing the imputation methods for firms that don't report in the first month and the second month. So instead of just treating them as missing values for some big important companies, there is a firm-specific estimate that gets plugged in when they don't report on time, and it turns out that's better than just treating them as missing values. So that's an example of there being some influence, but well within respecting the professional autonomy and the will of Congress in terms of its appropriations.
I think that's a great point for us to stop here and open up the floor for audience questions. Is there a mic that will go around? Okay.
There's a mic.
Just a reminder, if you get the mic, please speak clearly into the mic. Say your name and your affiliation, please. Let's start with the lady back there.
Hi, my name's Melanie Friedrichs. I'm not going to share my affiliation, but I'd like to ask a question. It seems to me, from what you've said, the biggest problem facing the BLS is the decline in the response to the survey for payrolls or the household survey for employment. And can you just give a little bit more detail on what you think the best response to that is? I've heard a couple different solutions. One is relying more on the private sector data, sort of like how you use private sector data on gas prices or airline prices. Maybe you could supplement the household survey with private data. Or you could also just spend more money on the survey. And I'm not sure how much that would cost. I think in the scheme of government, the BLS is still a relatively small budget item. But what do you think is the best way to approach this problem?
Well, just let me characterize the problem is all around the world, response rates are falling for the probability surveys, is what you're referring to. And why? It seems like it's a generational thing. It's also the increasing costs of collecting the surveys. So we think that throwing more money at the surveys without doing anything else is not the right answer. Clearly, we have to plug the hole in the meantime before we get to a more modernized, new generation system of collecting data from households. And we think that that new generation collection system blends the current survey, maybe one that's not quite as big, but certainly has to be a survey out there, with massive amounts of data collected from households across the internet. In countries that have tried this, they have moved from 100,000 households or less than 100,000 households to 1 million households. And through large numbers are able to find adequate data on most of the questions to publish without fear of falling response rates. So the modern system is out there, it's being tried, and we need to find ways of funding the experiment and then integrating that system into our own.
What Bill said, right? But always have to add a little bit more. So it's, by and large, unfortunately, paying participants for surveys is not cost effective. And there's an irony here. Our federal response rates, even though they are lower than they used to be, and not, and could fall more, they are still so high that if we start paying people, it's really expensive, right? And we start introducing a bias, right? Who takes the money, who doesn't, and what does that do? What we need to do is find ways to stabilize the responses for the surveys, because there's some information you just can't get any other way, and then supplement it, just as Bill said, with all the growth of other kinds of information. And also change the response mechanism. So there's a proposal that's been out there since my time, and while Bill was at BLS, they worked on it further to modernize the CPS. And that's to put the response rate, put it on the internet. It turns out response rates are much higher if you have an internet interface for doing this. But it's not trivial to move a survey to that platform. You have to do a lot of experimentation. But when we get there, response rates will probably go way up. The cost per response will be much lower. And then you'll have the resources to go after the people who are really hard to get. And you probably will still want a way for the people who will never go near a computer to respond, because they're part of our country as well.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Felix Houghton. I'm a student at Georgetown University. Do you think the idea of a BLS that is politicized will endure into the future? And if so, what do you foresee the long-term effects of that being? And if not, why not?
So let me start with that. Anybody who's been a parent or had a parent knows, trust takes years to build up and a moment to destroy. Yeah. And trust is not a wishy-washy, fairy iffy thing for statistical agencies. It is mission critical. Nobody uses information to make their most important decisions if they don't trust it. So the attacks on the unwarranted attacks on the integrity of BLS and the other parts of the statistical system will do lasting damage until trust is rebuilt. And right now you have trust in the people who believe those making the unwarranted attacks. Their trust has obviously gone down. And then the people who don't believe it are worried that the cures for this are going to actually make the data less trustworthy. So this is a bad place for the agencies, and we need to recover from it. I trust that the more informed and sober minds of our, in our country will work hard to repairing that damage. But it's not trivial. We have entire books written for the statistical agencies on the practices they need to follow to make sure that the data are trustworthy. And it starts by never claiming that it's perfect, because it never is, and making sure you're completely transparent, because people need to understand the virtues and the limitations of every statistic. Statistics are by definition not perfect. They're only as good as they can get. All right? And BLS data are not perfect, but they are better than any alternative outside of there, and they could be better than they are now.
Yeah.
Do you want to add to that, Bill? Or?
Just to share a conversation that Erica and I had with Dr. Antoni when he was a candidate. And we told him, and during that conversation, that the commissioner's job became a lot bigger job on August 1st as opposed to when it was, what it was on July 30th or 31st, I don't remember.
31st.
And the reason is that the commissioner coming in has got the additional job now of restoring all that trust.
No way, Norbert.
It's unfortunate that although I love Bill to death, and I've just met Erica. Erica's very nice. Thank you. This is great, and this is what we do, but it's very unfortunate that we have to be having this conversation right now. We are not in a good place with this. This is not productive. This has not been helpful. And, well, I won't say anything about somebody we just spoke of, but none of that stuff is helpful.
And I want to point out that it has accelerated the retirements of key people at BLS, key people throughout the whole statistical system. There's not a statistical agency out there that has less than 20% vacancy rate right now. Yeah. We have, 11 major vacancies in the senior leadership?
12.
12.
Out of 35, so that's...
35.
So that's a pretty significant number.
It's a big number, and so when you let's just say it was a well-meaning attack. We'll just give that to the president. When that was done, there should have been, or before that was done, some thought to the infrastructure in the agency. Remember, this is like building a bridge, and if your key construction workers and architects are suddenly missing because they have lost heart in the project, that bridge is very likely not to be as strong a bridge or as useful to the public. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done here, and Congress has to play a big role in that.
Yeah. Let me throw out one last thing. The other thing that trust is really important for? Response rates.
Yeah.
Why would you bother responding to a survey that was garbage?
Yep.
Right.
Bingo.
It's gotten very serious. Norbert, let's have some fun. I think this is a pretty libertarian question, so I'll go to you first, Norbert.
I thought I was being fun.
The White House website, congressional websites, central bank websites, and others are regularly down or missing. Why should I trust government data when it can't even manage consistent website hosting?
Oh, there you go.
I'm going to throw that in there with the shutdown we're in right now. Maybe you can take that all together. We're in a shutdown. We've missed, I think, one jobs report. We might miss a CPI report as well. Go with that wherever you like.
Why did you give that to me? That's not fun. I do think that kind of bolsters the case, though, of having multiple options and having multiple sources of data. And, maybe a better place to get to is, that the production is to recognize that, say, just for example, the production of the inflation rate, maybe that's not a public good, but maybe some of that data is a public good, maybe. Let's just say maybe that's the case. I'm not sure it is, but let's just say. Well, then maybe a better place to get to is sort of the government producing data. And in other words, you have the survey data, you have everything compiled, and you have a flat file, and people can do whatever they want with it. Maybe that's another way to approach the thing. You know, I'm just, I don't know. That's not fun either. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know.
It's not been a very fun day, but
Sorry.
it's been very informative, though.
Well, I think all government websites should go away because I think government should be smaller. We would disagree here, but as long as it's what it is, let's make sure that we provide all of that service without interruption to the public.
Yeah.
Eric, anything you want to add?
Yeah. So I do believe that that official statistics are an essential public good in the information age, just like our transportation infrastructure is essential for our productivity. I think that the information provided by our statistical system is critical for the smooth functioning of our economy. And as the amount of public data, private sector data grows, it's actually even more important. It's a smaller share of it, and I firmly believe that we need more public-private partnerships in putting it all together. But there are certain things, like our military, that are critical for us. I mean, if you go back to the Bible, what is the first thing that you see when they start talking about the formation of, of Israeli tribes, right? Weights and measures. Well, that's the beginning of statistics, right? Is making standards so that we can make good transactions with people whom we don't know.
Nice.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us, and thanks to our audience, both in person and online, for attending. Please join me one last time in thanking our panel. Thank you all so much.